What happens when one of Hollywood's most legendary actors sits down for what should be a routine interview and things spiral completely out of control? When Samuel L. Jackson walked onto the set of Tamron Hall's show, nobody expected the conversation to take the turn it did. What started as a discussion about his latest project became something else entirely. A back and forth that got so intense, so personal, that it ended with security being called and Jackson being escorted out of the studio. Before we get into exactly what was said that caused this massive blow-up, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really happened here. So let's set the scene. Samuel L. Jackson comes out. The audience is clapping. He's got that confident swagger he's known for. And Tamron Hall is all smiles as she welcomes him to the stage. They exchange pleasantries, he sits down, and everything seems perfectly normal. Tamron starts off with some softball questions about his career, his longevity in Hollywood, the usual stuff. Jackson is giving his standard answers, charming the audience, making them laugh with a few well-timed jokes. But then Tamron shifts gears. She brings up a recent interview Jackson did with another outlet, where he made some comments about the current state of Hollywood and how studios are more concerned with profits than storytelling. Now, this wasn't anything particularly controversial when he first said it. Lots of actors have made similar observations. But Tamron, she decides to push a little deeper. She asks him if he thinks his own career choices reflect that criticism, pointing out that he's been in plenty of big-budget franchises and commercial projects. Jackson's demeanor changes immediately. You can see it in his face. That easygoing smile tightens up just a bit. He leans back in his chair and says, "Well, Tamron, I think there's a difference between being part of good commercial projects and selling out completely. I've always chosen roles that interest me, that challenge me as an actor. Just because something makes money doesn't mean it's devoid of artistic merit." Tamron nods, but she's not letting it go. She comes back with, "But Samuel, you've been in how many Marvel films now? At what point does it stop being about the art and start being about the paycheck?" The audience goes quiet. You can feel the tension starting to build. Jackson sits forward now, and he's looking directly at Tamron with this intensity in his eyes. He says, "You know what? That's a pretty reductive way to look at it. Those Marvel films employ thousands of people. They inspire millions of fans. And yes, they make money. But I bring something to those roles. I'm not just showing up and reading lines. There's craft involved. There's character work. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there." Tamron responds, "I'm not saying you don't bring talent to your roles, Samuel. I'm just asking if you think there's a contradiction between criticizing Hollywood for being too commercial while participating in some of the most commercial projects out there." "It's a fair question." Jackson's jaw clenches. He says, "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Let me ask you something, Tamron. How many hard-hitting investigative pieces have you done this month versus how many celebrity puff pieces? You sit here in your nice studio with your nice set, and you interview actors and musicians and athletes, and that's fine. That's your show. But don't act like you're not part of the same system you're trying to critique through me." The audience gasps. Tamron's eyes widen for a split second, but she recovers quickly. She's a professional. She's handled difficult guests before. She says, "Samuel, I think we're getting off track here. I'm not the one being interviewed. We're here to talk about you and your work." But Jackson is heated now. He says, "No, we're here so you can get ratings by trying to make me look like a hypocrite. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You bring me on, you butter me up with some easy questions, and then you go for the gotcha moment. Well, congratulations, Tamron, you got your moment." Tamron tries to de-escalate. She says, "Samuel, that's not what this is. I have tremendous respect for your work, for your career. These are questions that people genuinely have. You're one of the most successful actors in Hollywood, and you've been vocal about the industry. I'm simply trying to have a conversation about that." Jackson shakes his head. He says, "A conversation. This isn't a conversation. This is an interrogation. There's a difference between asking thoughtful questions and trying to trap someone into saying something you can use for a headline. I've been doing this long enough to know the difference." Tamron's composure is starting to crack just slightly. She says, "I'm not trying to trap you into anything. If you feel like my questions are unfair, we can move on to something else. Let's talk about your upcoming project, the one you're here to promote." But Jackson is on a roll now. He says, "Oh, now you want to talk about what I'm here to promote? After you've already tried to tear me down, that's rich. You know what your problem is, Tamron? You think because you've got this platform, this show, that you can say whatever you want to, whoever you want, and there won't be any consequences. You think you can question my integrity, my choices, my career, and I'm just supposed to sit here and smile and take it." Tamron's voice gets firmer. She says, "Samuel, I asked you one question about your career choices in relation to comments you made publicly. If that feels like an attack to you, maybe you need to examine why that is. I'm a journalist. It's my job to ask questions. If you can't handle that, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." The audience is dead silent now. Jackson stands up. He says, "You know what? You're right. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this interview. Maybe I shouldn't have come here at all. Because clearly, you had your angle planned before I even walked through that door." Tamron stands up to, she says, "Sit down, Samuel. We're in the middle of a taping." Jackson laughs, but there's no humor in it. He says, "I'm not one of your staff members, Tamron. You don't tell me what to do. I came here as a guest, and I'm leaving as a guest who just realized he's not welcome," Tamron says. "You are welcome here, but not if you're going to be disrespectful. I asked you a legitimate question, and you turned it into a personal attack against me and my show." Jackson fires back. "You made it personal when you questioned my integrity. You want to talk about my movies? Fine. You want to talk about my process? Fine. But you don't get to sit there and suggest that I'm a sellout who doesn't care about his craft. I've been working in this industry since before you knew what a television camera was." Tamron's face flushes. She says, "That is completely out of line. My age, my experience, that has nothing to do with this conversation. You're deflecting because you don't want to answer the question." Jackson points at her. He says, "I'm deflecting. You're the one who brought up my career like you have some moral high ground to stand on. You think your show is somehow above the fray? You think you're not playing the same game everyone else in this business is playing?" Please. Tamron takes a breath, trying to maintain control. She says, "Samuel, I understand you're upset, but we need to bring this back to a professional level. We have an audience here. We have cameras rolling. Can we please just take a moment and reset?" Jackson looks out at the audience, then back at Tamron. He says, "You want professional? I'll give you professional. Professionally speaking, this is one of the most poorly conducted interviews I've ever been a part of. You came in with an agenda. You tried to execute it, and now that I'm calling you out on it, you want to act like I'm the one causing problems?" Tamron's voice rises slightly. She says, "I did not come in with an agenda. I came in with questions that are relevant to someone of your stature and influence. If you can't see the difference between that and an attack, then I don't know what to tell you." Jackson says, "Here's what I see. I see someone who's trying to make a name for themselves by taking shots at people who've already made theirs. You want controversy. You want viral moments. You want people talking about your show. Well, mission accomplished, Tamron. People are going to be talking about this." Tamron crosses her arms. She says, "You know what, Samuel? You're right about one thing. People will be talking about this. They'll be talking about how one of Hollywood's biggest stars couldn't handle a simple question without throwing a tantrum on national television. The audience reacts audibly to that." Jackson's eyes narrow. He says, "A tantrum? You think this is a tantrum? I'm standing up for myself. I'm refusing to let you twist my words and my career into something it's not. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem, not mine." Tamron says, "It doesn't make me uncomfortable, Samuel. What makes me uncomfortable is watching someone I respected, someone whose work I've admired, behave like a child because they got asked one challenging question. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, survivors of tragedies. They can handle tough questions. Why can't you?" Jackson takes a step closer to her desk. He says, "Don't you dare compare me to your other guests. You have no idea what kind of questions are tough and what kind are just designed to provoke. That's what you did here. You provoked me, and now you're acting surprised that I'm responding." Tamron doesn't back down. She says, "I asked you about your career choices. That's it. Everything else, all of this, that's on you. You chose to make this personal. You chose to attack me and my show. You chose to turn what could have been an interesting discussion into whatever this has become," Jackson says. "You're not hearing me. You're not listening. You asked me a loaded question and then acted innocent when I called you on it. That's manipulation, Tamron. That's what tabloid journalists do, not serious interviewers. Tamron's voice gets sharp. She says, "Do not call me a tabloid journalist. I have built my career on integrity, on asking real questions and getting real answers. Just because you don't like the question doesn't make it tabloid journalism," Jackson says. "And just because you don't like my answer doesn't make me wrong. You want me to sit here and admit that I'm some kind of Hollywood hypocrite? That I'm part of the problem I was talking about? I'm not going to do that because it's not true. My career speaks for itself. I don't need to justify it to you or anyone else." Top Tamron leans forward on her desk. She says, "I never asked you to justify your entire career. I asked you one question about one aspect of it. The fact that you've blown this up into this massive confrontation tells me that maybe there's something there you don't want to examine." Jackson's voice gets louder. He says, "Oh, now you're psychoanalyzing me. You're a talk show host, not a therapist. Stay in your lane." Tamron. Tamron raises her voice to match his. She says, "My lane is asking questions. That's exactly what I'm doing. And your lane is answering them, or at least it should be. Instead, you're up here yelling at me like I've committed some kind of crime against you." Jackson says, "You committed a crime against honest journalism. You set me up, you baited me, and now you're playing victim. I've seen this playbook before. It's tired, it's transparent, and I'm not falling for it," Tom says. "The only playbook here is the one where a guest comes on a show, gets asked a question they don't like, and tries to burn the whole thing down rather than just answering honestly. That's your playbook, Samuel, not mine." Jackson looks around the studio, at the crew, at the cameras. He says, "Is anyone else seeing this? Is anyone else watching her rewrite history in real time? I came here in good faith. I sat down, I answered your questions, and the second you tried to corner me, I defended myself. That's not burning anything down. That's called having a backbone," Tamron says. "Defending yourself would be calmly explaining your position. What you're doing is attacking me personally, questioning my professionalism, and disrupting my show. There's a difference, and you know it," Jackson says. "Your show. This isn't happening in a vacuum, Tamron. This is my reputation you're playing with. These are my choices, my career, my life. You're picking apart for entertainment. So, yes, it's personal to me. It should be personal to me. The fact that it's not personal to you is exactly the problem," Tamron says. "Of course, it's not personal to me. I'm doing my job. I have to maintain objectivity. I have to ask the hard questions. That's what journalists do. If everyone just softballed every guest, what would be the point?" Jackson says, "There's a difference between a hard question and a disrespectful one. You crossed that line? And now you're mad because I'm not just sitting here taking it? Well, too bad. I spent too many years fighting for respect in this industry to let someone take shots at me on television." Tamron says, "I am not taking shots at you. How many times do I have to say that? I asked you about something you said publicly, something that's been discussed in the media. That's fair game. That's literally what these interviews are for." Jackson says, "No, these interviews are supposed to be for promoting projects, for having genuine conversations, for connecting with audiences. They're not supposed to be ambushes. They're not supposed to be gotcha moments. You turned this into something it never should have been." Tamron's frustration is visible now. She says, "Samuel, I have been nothing but respectful to you from the moment you walked out here. I welcomed you. I introduced you warmly. I asked about your career with genuine interest. The fact that you can't see that, the fact that you've twisted this into some kind of attack, that's not my fault," Jackson says. "Respectful? You call questioning my artistic integrity respectful? You call suggesting I'm a hypocrite respectful? We have very different definitions of that word, Tamron." Tamron stands completely upright now, her hands pressed flat against her desk. She says, "I never called you a hypocrite. Those are your words, not mine. I asked if you saw a contradiction." "That's a question, Samuel. Questions are not accusations. The fact that you heard it as an accusation maybe says more about your own feelings than it does about my intentions." Jackson shakes his head slowly, his voice dropping to something more controlled but no less intense. He says, "You know exactly what you were doing. You're too smart to play dumb now. You phrased it carefully, sure, but the implication was crystal clear. You wanted me to either defend myself, which makes me look guilty, or dismiss it, which makes me look arrogant. Either way, you win and I lose. That's the game. Tamron's eyes flash. She says, "There is no game, Samuel. There are no winners and losers here." This is a conversation that went sideways because you couldn't handle a moment of self-reflection. I interviewed dozens of people every month, and somehow they managed to answer challenging questions without accusing me of sabotage. Jackson steps even closer to her desk, and you can see the production staff starting to shift uncomfortably in the background. He says, "Maybe those people are just better at playing along. Maybe they're more willing to let you control the narrative. But I'm not built that way, Tamron. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. If that makes me a difficult guest, so be it." Tamron matches his intensity. She says, "It doesn't make you difficult, it makes you defensive. And I have to wonder why. If you're so confident in your choices, if your career really does speak for itself like you claim, then why does one question rattle you this much? Why can't you just answer it and move on?" Jackson's voice rises again. He says, "Because it's not just one question. It's the tone, it's the setup, it's the whole atmosphere you created. You act like you're doing some kind of public service by interrogating me, but really you're just trying to create a moment. Well, congratulations, you created one. Just not the one you wanted." Tamron takes a step back from her desk. She says, "You keep saying I wanted to create a moment, but look at yourself right now. Look at what you're doing. You're the one standing. You're the one raising your voice. You're the one who turned a conversation into a confrontation. I'm still trying to have a dialogue here." Jackson laughs bitterly. He says, "A dialogue. This stopped being a dialogue the second you decided my answer wasn't good enough. You kept pushing, you kept prodding, and now you want to act like you're the reasonable one. That's gaslighting. That's what that is." The audience gasps again, and Tamron's face goes pale for a moment before flushing red. She says, "Do not accuse me of gaslighting. That is a serious accusation, and it's completely unfounded. I have done nothing but try to have a professional conversation with you while you have hurled insults at me, my show, and my integrity. If anyone is being manipulative here, Samuel, it's you." Jackson's entire posture changes. He spreads his arms wide. He says, "Me? I'm being manipulative. By defending myself, by refusing to be painted as something I'm not. That's rich. That's truly rich. You invite me here. You attack my character, and then when I stand up for myself, suddenly I'm the villain. This is unbelievable." Tamron's voice is steel now. She says, "I did not attack your character. But you have attacked mine repeatedly over the last several minutes. You've called me unprofessional. You've compared me to tabloid journalists. You've accused me of having an agenda and trying to manipulate you. And for what? Because I asked you one question you didn't like. One question, Samuel." Jackson points at her, his fingers shaking slightly. He says, "It wasn't the question. It was everything behind it. It was the assumption, the judgment, the implication that I owe you or anyone else an explanation for how I've lived my life and built my career. I don't owe you that. I don't owe anyone that." Tamron's voice cracks just slightly. She says, "You're right. You don't owe me anything. And I don't owe you a platform to come on my show and disrespect me in front of my audience and my crew. This is my house, Samuel. And in my house, we treat each other with respect, even when we disagree." Jackson takes a step back, his eyes scanning the studio again. He says, "Your house. Fine. Then I'm leaving your house, because clearly we have very different ideas about what respect looks like. You think respect means I sit here quietly while you take jabs at me. I think respect means you don't take jabs in the first place." Tamron's voice is shaking now. Whether from anger or something else is hard to tell. She says, "Samuel, if you walk off this set right now, everyone is going to know exactly what happened here. They're going to see that you couldn't handle one tough interview. Is that really the legacy you want?" Jackson turns back to face her fully. He says, "My legacy was established long before I walked into this studio, and it'll be just fine long after I leave. What people are going to see is a man who stood up for himself when someone tried to tear him down. They're going to see someone who refuses to play games. And you know what? I'm fine with that." Tamron takes a shaky breath. She says, "You are so convinced that I'm the enemy here. You are so sure that I had some malicious intent. But Samuel, I'm just a person doing my job. I'm just someone who respects you enough to ask you real questions instead of lobbing If you can't see that, if you can't appreciate that, then maybe you're not the person I thought you were. Jackson's expression softens for just a fraction of a second, but then it hardens again. He says, and maybe you're exactly the person I thought you were. Someone who hides behind the shield of journalism to justify being provocative. Someone who creates conflict and then acts innocent when it explodes. I've been in this business too long to not see it for what it is. Tamron shakes her head, and there might be tears forming in her eyes, but she's fighting them back. She says, I am not creating conflict. I asked you a question. That's all I did. Everything else, everything that's happened here, that's because of choices you made. You chose to take offense. You chose to escalate. You chose to make this personal. I was just trying to do my job. Jackson's voice drops low again. He says, your job shouldn't involve making your guests feel attacked. Your job should be creating space for honest conversation, not manufacturing drama. I came here in good faith, Tamron. I really did. But this isn't what I signed up for. Tamron's voice is barely above a whisper now. She says, neither did I. I didn't sign up to be yelled at, to be insulted, to have my professionalism questioned on my own show. I thought we were going to have a good conversation. I thought you were going to be the person everyone says you are. Professional, thoughtful, interesting. Instead, I got this. Jackson looks at her for a long moment. He says, maybe we both got something we didn't expect. Maybe that's the real story here. To people who thought they understood each other, who thought this would be easy, and it turned out to be anything but. I'm sorry you feel disrespected, Tamron. I really am. But I also feel disrespected, and I don't think you can hear that. Tamron wipes at her eyes quickly. She says, I can hear it, Samuel. I just don't agree with it. I don't think I did anything wrong by asking you that question. But clearly, we're not going to find common ground here. So maybe you're right. Maybe you should go. Jackson nods slowly. He says, yeah, maybe I should. He starts to remove his microphone, his hands working at the clip on his lapel. A producer rushes over to help him, but Jackson waves them off. He says, I got it. I can take care of myself. Tamron watches him, her arms crossed over her chest now. She says, Samuel, for what it's worth, I really did admire your work. I still do. I wish this had gone differently. Jackson pauses, the microphone in his hand now. He says, yeah, me too. But wishing doesn't change what happened. We both said what we said. We both did what we did. Now we have to live with it. The studio is completely silent, except for the sound of Jackson's footsteps as he walks toward the edge of the stage. Tamron calls out, Samuel. He stops but doesn't turn around. She says, you're making a mistake. Jackson turns his head slightly, just enough for his profile to be visible. He says, maybe, but it's my mistake to make. And with that, he walks off the set, leaving Tamron standing alone at her desk. The audience frozen in shocked silence, and the cameras still rolling. Production staff start moving. Security personnel appear from the wings, and the organized chaos of a show falling apart in real time takes over. Tamron stands there for another moment, then slowly sits back down, her hands trembling slightly as she reaches for her notes. That's what happened when Samuel L. Jackson sat down with Tamron Hall for what should have been a routine promotional interview. Two strong personalities, one question, and a confrontation that nobody saw coming. What do you think? Was Tamron out of line with her question? Or was Samuel too defensive? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe for more stories like this one.